I want to take a minute to introduce our speaker, Patrick Ellington. Patrick is a baseball researcher, independent baseball researcher, and his blog, he posts some of his work to his Red, Black, Green baseball blog, where he focuses his writing on the African diaspora's past, present, and future relationship with baseball. And I found Patrick on social media, where he is prolific in his observations. And I reached out to him and asked if he could present to our group. He's written on several topics that I think are relevant to the Northwest chapter. And one of those topics is about the resurgence of Black excellence behind the dish. And one of the young catchers that he profiles is Harry Ford, who, of course, many of us who have watched the Mariners over the years know Harry Ford because he was a first-round draft pick of the ball club, of the organization, and he's been playing in Everett this season. And he was in the Futures game. He played for the W World Baseball Classic for Great Britain. So he's a Mariners prospect to watch. And Patrick has written on a lot of things, including this. So I hope that Patrick can maybe share a little bit of his work on this particular topic, just as a way to introduce his work to us with the local flair, and then talk maybe more broadly about your work, Patrick, your blog, and then certainly don't be shy about pitching your blog and putting a link into the chat box or whatever, and we'll go from there. So Patrick, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your relationship with baseball or with SABR, and tell us what you want us to know.
Okay. First of all, let me say again, thank you guys for having me. I'm really flattered and I really appreciate it. Thank you for everyone who's attended and take your time out to do so. It's really great just to be able to speak about you guys and get on my soapbox and do my thing. So just give you some background on myself. First and foremost, I'm 25 years old, born and raised in Northeast Ohio, specifically Cleveland and Youngstown. I come from a baseball family. My great-grandfather played in the Negro League very briefly as a utility player during the 40s. And he played a little bit of minor league ball in like Class A for like in like Struthers, Ohio, something like that. Just very low level minor leagues when it was minor leagues and more so just town ball than anything else, excuse me. My great-grandfather was born around the same time as Jackie Robinson and Satchel Paige. We don't know because we don't know his exact birth date, but my great-grandfather was born in the early 20s and he passed away in 2015 when I was 16 years old. So that's kind of where it starts on my mother. That's my mother's side, by the way. So my great-grandfather took my grandmother to games a lot growing up at Municipal Stadium in Cleveland. My grandmother and my great-grandfather took my mother to a lot of games at Municipal Stadium when she was growing up as well. And my mom took me to games as well when I was growing up. So it's been a tradition for our family. My father is from New Jersey. He was raised in New Jersey during the 60s and 70s. So he grew up a Yankees fan, Thurman Munson, those guys, Don Mattingly. So my earliest memories of baseball are watching CC Sabathia and Derek Jeter. And we know who they are. And for me, as someone born in '98, you guys can assume what Derek Jeter and CC Sabathia would mean to me and players like that. One of my earliest memories of baseball is reading a Sports Illustrated Kids magazine and seeing Sean Figgins and Derek Jeter on the page, tearing out the page and keeping the page until the paper turned yellow. When I was in second grade at 8 years old, my mother made me do a report on Satchel Paige, considering he was the first Black player to play, first Black pitcher to play in MLB and in the AL, and he did so with Cleveland. And she really hammered home the interconnection between Black history and baseball as well at a young age for me. I had childhood books about Jackie Robinson, Henry Aaron, excuse me, and whatnot. Okay, where do I go? Okay. I started writing about baseball 3 years ago when I went to Morehouse College. That's where I attended college, Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. I was a film major and with a concentration on screenwriting. That's kind of my trade. I'm a fiction writer by trade. Journalism was kind of something I stumbled into because I was suffering through writer's block during the pandemic, and I needed something to write about just to stay in rhythm. And I turned to baseball, and people like you, my audience, just fellow baseball fans, have kind of put me on this trajectory with the support from taking me from someone who was just running a random blog and tweeting about baseball to being someone who has bylines on MLB.com, Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, etc. So that being said, I'm just trying to take this and run with it, like how someone like Tim Anderson kind of switched to baseball at such a late age in 11th grade. Bad timing, I know, but that's the kind of situation I use just to compare, because he didn't start playing baseball until he was in 11th grade. So I mean, that's a feat in itself that he even made it to the majors. I want to get started with the presentation, if that's okay, Tip. Okay. All right. I'm going to share my screen. And one moment, I got to change my system preferences so I can actually share my screen. Okay.
While Patrick is setting that up, I did link his Substack, his blog, in the chat in case anybody wants to explore that.
There we go.
Sorry, guys. This is my first time using a share screen. It's kind of giving me a lot of things I got to go through very quick. I apologize.
No worries, take your time.
Okay. Okay. This is my presentation for Northwest chapter of Society of American Based Research on the resurgence of Black excellence behind the dish. Thank you, guys. So my background, as I said before, born and raised in Cleveland and Youngstown, Ohio. 24 years old. I attended Morehouse College. My bylines are at MLB.com, Baseball Prospectus, Baseball America, and I also have my own independent blog, as well as a few other websites I worked for in the past. Pretty much all of my work focuses on the African diaspora's relationship with baseball instead of just African American players. For me, I feel like that level of detail is paramount and it's missing. And it's kind of ignored when it's done by notable people such as Bob Kendrick. And at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, he has done a lot of imperative work to not only shine light on African American players in the Negro Leagues, but also Black baseball players from the Caribbean and Latin America who played in the Negro Leagues as well. What is African diaspora and why is it relevant? African diaspora is accompanies, well, diaspora is a term in itself that just means people of a certain culture or ethnic group or etc. Spread out across the world. So there's a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be an individual African descent, or in other words, a Black person. When I attended Morehouse College, this was a part of my studies. I went to college with Black people from all across the globe, especially a large contingent of first-generation Americans who are the parents of children of immigrants, excuse me. And that really kind of shaped my perspective and how I see things. So that would be one of the main things I would say shape why I cover Black baseball players who are not from the United States. Also having friends and family who are of Jamaican descent, of Dominican descent, of Haitian descent as well. Means that I got to hold myself to a different standard than other people who may not want to do that, or feel that they don't have to. Another big interest with me was outspoken Afro-Latino players. I picked these four because these four have said a lot on the record. Louis Tiant II boycotted James Buckhead Grant's book about Black Aces because it didn't include black pitchers who won 20 games from Latin America and the Caribbean or the Caribbean. Louis Tiant II actually got in a spat with the late James Grant over it, and they later settled and apologized. And James Grant later acknowledged in a later version of his book, The Black Aces, that it was just about African American players. Louis Tiant II is an Afro-Cuban player. He's the son of a Negro Leagues player. That's Louis Tiant III. I'm talking about Louis Tiant II was the one who played Negro Leagues, excuse me. So yeah, Louis Tiant III, was very outspoken about Afro-Latino players now themselves as Black on and off the field. Rod Carew was another one. I don't know if you guys knew this, but the real reason why he was traded from the Twins wasn't just because of the contract dispute he had with the owner at the time, who was noted as one of MLB's more outspoken bigots. It was actually related to a comment that the owner said about Black racial players that kind of forced Rod Carew to want to leave the Twins and go to the Angels. Another thing with Rod Carew is he is from Panama, a country in Latin America that has a lot of history with African diaspora in terms of being a haven for escaped slaves from different parts of Latin America and the Caribbean that still had enslavement of Black people in place. And Panama was also a haven for African slaves of American descent as well, similar to how Canada was, and how that's a part of Ferguson Jenkins' story, which also encapsulates into what is African diaspora and why it's unimportant. We see Fergie Jenkins get acknowledgement as Black all the time, but we don't see the same for someone like Fernando Rodney, an individual who is a Samoan American. We know who Samoan Americans are. Samoan Americans are a group of African Americans that were free from slavery and deported to the Dominican Republic with Hispaniola when it was under complete control of Haiti. Many people do not know this, but a lot of abolitionists in the United States that were white and that were anti-slavery were also against the idea that African slaves should have American citizenship or should even live in America. The Jefferson administration and Thomas Jefferson drafted plans to deport mass amounts of African Americans, African slaves then, to Latin America, the Caribbean, and back to Africa. And it's actually the origin of the country Liberia in Africa as well. That idea to deport Black people back to the Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa. I put Carlos Delgado here because Carlos Delgado has been very outspoken about being a Black Latino on and off the field. So has Francisco Lindor, who actually organized African American and Latin American players to kneel during Opening Day 2020 and showing solidarity with the murder of George Floyd. That was a very big overlooked moment that included other MLB stars or former stars like Edwin Encarnacion, Jose Ramirez, Yohan Moncada, Eloy Jimenez, Jose Abreu, and Tim Anderson. So yeah. I would have put Roberto Clemente here, but he would have been kind of obvious. Roberto Clemente's perception of his identity as a Black man and his organization is something that's really been well covered, but it is kind of it's not as well known as it should be. I watched a documentary with Orlando Cepeda in it, who was very close to Roberto Clemente, his fellow countryman. And Cepeda said that one day in a conversation with Clemente told him, in America, we have two strikes against us because we are Black and because we are Latino. And that kind of really, and I wouldn't say opened my eyes, but I would say that it kind of, you you just can't ignore it. You have to, when you want to talk about these people and their stories, I feel like you have to include this, or unless you're not or else you're not being detailed, you're not telling the truth, you're not telling people's truth, you're not being historical, and whatnot. So I'll go into the next slide. Thank you for listening to my tangent. No, the resurgence of Black catchers in MLB. My article was inspired by the performance of Harry Ford and Bo Naylor in the World Baseball Classic during 2023, and the breakout seasons that they both had in minor league baseball during 2022. Harry Ford, of Jamaican descent. His parents are both Jamaican, but they both grew up in Britain. I think one of his parents is Jamaican, but he played for United Kingdom. He represented United Kingdom and or Great Britain in WBC, and Bo Naylor represented Canada in the WBC. I wanted to show a different perspective. Pretty much all the coverage of anything related to Black catchers that's been written on paper in the last 10 years has pretty much been, where are the Black catchers, instead of here are the Black catchers, and there haven't been any cover. But I wanted to zig when everyone was zagging and show people the resurgent talent at the position. When you look at the inherent visibility and importance of a catcher to a baseball team on and off the field, they're pretty much in every frame, every time a pitcher throws. The catcher's gears are just some of the most iconic gear in American sports. There's nothing really like it anywhere else, similar to a football helmet or a pair of basketball shoes or something, you know. Catcher's gear is catcher's gear. You know what it is. Even people that don't know what, I don't follow baseball all that much, can probably recognize a chest protector and a face mask that a catcher wears or umpire wear. And that's important. And another thing that's important as well, a lot of catchers typically become coaches, scouts, and managers. So the number of Black managers, scouts, coaches, etc., is directly going to be related to the Black number of catchers. It's based on baseball's norms and how baseball works. I kind of wanted to, before I talked about my Red Ball Green Baseball blog and everything like that, I kind of wanted to have the floor for any questions for right now, because I kind of said a lot, and I kind of wanted to focus on our exchanges with each other, because I feel like answer questions will be better than simply just presenting something to you guys.
So Patrick, I'm sorry, someone else?
Yeah. As a person interested in African-American baseball history, Rick Solomon and I work on military-related baseball, like Oscar Charlton and Bullet Rogan, you know, the two Buffalo Soldier guys. Are you, I guess I'd have to say Ohtani has been compared to being the greatest utility player, but there are those in the baseball world that think that Bullet Rogan, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he was a player for the Kansas City Monarchs, played for like 30 years. He did everything. Do you have any thoughts on how you compare someone from the 1920s and 30s to the modern era? Because that's something we're all kind of struggling with right now.
So it's funny you say this. I'm actually doing an article series on top 10 Black players at each position. I'm including the Negro Leagues as well, not just MLB. I'm including players who might have played somewhere else that wasn't in the Negro Leagues or MLB, such as in Latin America somewhere, like Eduardo Green of Nicaragua, Jamaican Nicaraguan player. I'll talk about him in a minute. For comparing players from like past eras, when you, like especially Negro Leagues players, because of the lack of statistical data, I feel like you have to use a lot of first and second hand accounts, but typically first hand accounts from the players themselves, the scouts, the owners of the teams, the managers and the coaches, etc. Because the word of mouth was the only way things were kind of, the word of mouth was a primary source of information back then. So it's not like we didn't have all the numbers we had, and in the Negro Leagues, they couldn't afford statisticians to always afford statistics to keep track of the statistics and stuff like that, or players kept their own statistics, which weren't always accurate. A la Satchel Paige, who put a lot of embellishment on his career, but it's still probably the greatest pitcher ever, regardless. So I say firsthand accounts, like hearing the owner of the Homestead Grays say that Biz McKee was better than Josh Gibson was a big factor for me and why I put Biz McKee above Josh Gibson in my top 10 black catchers list. Hearing stories about Quincy Trope, switch hitting catcher, played in Negro leagues in the 30s and the 40s and had an illustrious career in the Latin American leagues during the 30s and 40s. First black catcher in the AL was Cleveland in 1952. Hear firsthand accounts about him, made me had to put him at a certain level because you just weren't going to hear certain comparisons being made about players like Josh Gibson, Oscar Charleston, I would say, Buck Leonard, calling Buck Leonard a black Lou Gehrig, who was a better fielder than Lou Gehrig, is extremely high praise back then. Somebody saying that, scouts saying that, and major league players saying that Josh Gibson was a better hitter than Babe Ruth is insane to say. Even back then, even now, it's kind of saying the same, but back then when they were still recently played and kind of contemporaries, you have to take heed and kind of take notice and kind of understand that they were watching back then. They were the best of the best back then. They probably have good sense of the judge of players and stuff like that. And I also think that the performance of certain Negro Leagues players when they moved over, like Satchel Paige, like Jackie Robinson, like Monty Irvin in his late 30s, not dominating MLB, but still being a well above average all-star level player in his late 30s, kind of is a testament to how good the Negro Leagues was. I don't think Satchel Paige gets enough credit. I think he's a very underrated player, which is kind of weird to say, but I definitely think he is, just based off the fact that he dominated AAA and MLB during his 40s and his 50s. Who puts up a sub-3 ERA in AAA in their 50s? Who even feels like doing that? Honestly, it's just mind-boggling to me just thinking about it. Like, I was looking at Satchel Paige's baseball reference page the other day. Who runs out at 52 years old, throws 3 scoreless innings along 1 hit, and he strikes out a batter. And then, you have to be a prodigy to do something like that at 52, in my opinion. So I would say newspaper articles, scouting reports, autobiographies, biographies. The Negro Leagues were well documented. The player mentioned before, Quincy Trope, he wrote an autobiography called 20 Years Too Soon, which I think is must reading. That just really shows that these guys knew how to keep track of what they were doing, and we can trust their word.
Patrick,
Thanks.
what is unique about the diaspora with relation to black catchers? Where's the hook in that?
Okay, so you got Manny Sanguillen. He was very outspoken about being black. He's from Panama. A lot of Panamanian players, especially Panama, has a very strong black history. The hook in that is that you got catchers like Manny Sanguillen, John Roseboro, who else? Roy Campanella, all these guys who played back in the day. And by the way, Manny Sanguillen was a part of the first all-black lineup in MLB history. It's part of the 1971 Pirates alongside other outspoken Afro-Latino players like Roberto Clemente. Randy Stennett was on that team as well, from Panama as well. And Randy Stennett's parents actually immigrated from Trinidad to Panama. Many people don't know that. A lot of individuals from Trinidad and Tobago, Haiti, and Dominican Republic, Jamaica, etc., immigrated to Panama in the early 1900s to work on the Panama Canal, and that is a big part of Panama's national identity as a Pan-African nation in a sense. And it's actually a contingent of African Americans in Panama as well, you know, because of stationed down there, because of the military and whatnot. And actually, I'll give you a Panamanian catcher in today's game who Christian Bancourt, although he's not a good catcher, or you got Bruce Maxwell, who made those brief cameos with the A's before he was kind of sat down for the kneeling stuff. You have him as well. Last full-time catcher in MLB, many people don't know this, but Russell Martin is a Black catcher. He was raised by his father, who was a Black man in Montreal, Canada. Yeah, it's I think that there's a lack of coverage on the diversity and of Black people, and I feel like there's the coverage of Black people in baseball is kind of monolithic and it lacks detail, and I think that's why I wanted that's why I did what I did, but also why I do what I do in relation to the diaspora.
Patrick, thank you. Patrick, thanks for being here. And I had a quick, I'll try to make this as quick and easy as possible. But I grew up about 2.5 blocks away from the old Met Stadium in Bloomington, Minnesota. So I grew up watching, speaking of Black catchers, one of the players I idolized was Earl Batty, who was their longtime starter back in the 60s when I was a young kid.
Yeah, he's on my top 10 list, actually. I have him.
Oh, 7. He is?
Yes, he is. Absolutely. He's a bit underrated. If he didn't get hurt in his 30s, he probably would have been a lot higher on my list. And he probably would have been a lot well regarded too, especially those twin teams during those 60 years were really good. They had like 4 or 5 91 seasons, and they had the 105-1 season where they lost to the Dodgers in Game 7. And that was really big for me too, because Batty and Buckhead Grant, James Grant, they were really prolific Black batters. You don't really see those often in baseball.
Right, and of course Mudcat Grant was one of my heroes too, playing on those same Twins teams. And then of course Rod Carew was there, came in a little bit later.
Man had Tony Oliva too.
Exactly, and Tony Oliva from Cuba. But it was a very poorly kept secret that Calvin Griffith, the owner of the team back in those days, was racist as the day is long.
Yes.
And we used to sneak into the games there in the stadium, and then believe it or not, I was actually hired as a vendor there, and people couldn't believe that I actually got a job after sneaking into the games all the time. But anyway, later on in the 70s, long after I had joined the military and moved away, there was all this speculation back there in Minnesota that when Rod Carew left, I think it was in 77, when he went to the Angels as a free agent, about the same time that Lyman Bostock left and Larry Heisel left, 2 other Black players, that they didn't leave just because of the free agency and the fact that Calvin Griffith, being as racist as he was also very much a cheapskate as well. So, so the cover story always was, well, he wasn't willing to pay him. But I always wondered if they left, if all 3 of those guys left because of the race issue. And then if you fast forward about 6 or 8 years after that, when Kirby Puckett started playing for the Twins in the 80s, and he, of course, grew up on the south side of Chicago, and he was often asked, he said, well, and in the 80s and 90s, that, MLB, for whatever reason, they didn't actively recruit in African-American areas or neighborhoods around the U.S.
Yeah, they only stuck to really California. That's the only place I really go is L.A.
Exactly. And Kirby Puckett was always questioned about that. Well, why did you choose, as athletically skilled as you are, why did you choose baseball? And he said, well, I just liked it better. And he goes, which makes me unusual. And then finally, I remember in the late 90s, that finally the MLB office, back when Bud Selig was commissioner, they started recognizing, hey, we got all these talented athletes that are right down the street or right around the corner or in our backyard, literally, figuratively. Why aren't we recruiting? And then in these areas, and I remember all my years that I was in the military, I was in the Navy for like 20 years. when us sports fans would start talking, and these other guys when we were on board ship and out at sea, and I noticed, I don't think I knew, out of all my black shipmates, I don't think in the 70s and 80s I had one black shipmate or friend that was a baseball fan. Okay, because they just didn't seem, it didn't seem to be appealing to African Americans of my generation. And then I think MLB finally recognized that. And my question, after all of that, my question to you is, when they started that initiative to actually start recruiting, okay, African Americans, not just Dominicans and Panamanians and Puerto Ricans and stuff, but African Americans, how successful have they been in that effort? And in your humble opinion, or have they been successful? Should they be doing it much better, or have they? What grade, letter grade, would you give them for the last 20 years in recruiting African American players?
I'd give them a C minus.
Okay.
Just because it hasn't really been long enough. And I feel like there hasn't been, but also I would say the steps forward haven't really been as big as I'd like, because I feel like MLB isn't being aggressive enough. For me, I feel like it starts with advertising the rich history that Black people have in the game. That's something that was hammered to me at a very young age, just based on who I was raised by, and learning about the history of African Americans in professional sports. Baseball was huge in the development of the identity of the Black person who wanted to play professional sports. I would say when it comes to the foundation of Black professional athletes, the three sports are track and field, baseball, and probably boxing. Yeah, those three I would say are the foundation for sure. Baseball, track and field, boxing. Track and field, Jesse Owens, Maya Rudolph. The pipeline of track and field athletes from HBCUs was huge. The pipeline of track and field athletes from the Caribbean and Africa, what they were doing, sprints or endurance racing, etc., was very big as well. Boxing, we all know Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, etc. Boxing is a whole monster in itself that's actually really similar to baseball, especially with the race aspect of it all. But just to circle back, MLB has, the MLB develops programs in place. To put the first one in Compton. Products of that program in Compton, J.P. Crawford, Hunter Green, Dominic Smith, and there's a plethora of others in the minor leagues making their way right now. There's one in Atlanta. Products of that, Michael Harris II, C.J. Abrams. So it's working. We're seeing the young talent rise to the top, to the upper levels in the minors and to the majors as we speak. Hunter Green, who's having a really good year this year, and so I feel like it is working. Probably just not at the rate I think it should be. And I think you also got to look at the system for college baseball athletics and to take that into account as well. When you look at the structure of how scholarships are distributed for baseball compared to football and basketball, based on the structure of the sport, with how baseball, if Vanderbilt could give out 50 full scholarships, they'd have the best team in baseball every year. Versus, they divide scholarships into portions just because of the competitive balance, where a small school might be able to get somebody worthwhile, which is kind of redundant and it's kind of archaic, and it should be. But I think the college athletics thing is kind of very big too, even though a lot of baseball players get drafted out of high school. I also think that that you need more Black scouts, more Black GMs, more Black AGMs as well, to kind of resolve the issue. Because there's always going to be it's not as worse as it once was, probably during the 70s and 80s, but there's always going to be slight inherent biases against Black players, just based on certain things that get passed down from generation to generation, whether it's inadvertent or not, or is blatantly racist. It is kind of the reason why you haven't seen as many Black catchers in in recent years. I feel like the way that black catchers are perceived is similar to the way that black quarterbacks are perceived, with the mental demand in the game combined with the physical aspect, the leadership, the coach on the field thing, how a lot of catchers become managers, scouts, etc. Similar to how a lot of quarterbacks and whatnot become the analysts, the evaluators, etc., because they know the game. Or like up the middle player in football, your safeties, your linebackers, your linemen, and those are usually your scouts. Players who play up the similar. Baseball is kind of like football. Your up the middle players are typically your players that matter most. Until we saw receivers kind of. That's where football was going to have to go, to throwing more. I'm sorry for that tangent. So C-, I think the Chicago White Sox have their own program, the ACE program, where they develop black players, solely black players. It's happening. There's a lot of black baseball players themselves who run camps and stuff like that. There's a lot of there's a player I know, Juan Hillman Jr., a minor leaguer, the godson and godbrother, the godson of Tom Gordon, and the godson of Tom Gordon, and the godbrother of D. Gordon Strange, and Nick Gordon, etc., the other Gordon brothers. He said to me that growing up, having a black baseball coach, being on a team majority black players, was a very important experience for him, learning the way that his culture embraces the game and whatnot, things like that. So I will say, it has to be. I feel like it has to be. There has to be more promotion of major leaguers as well. I feel like you have to show the guys at the top of the ladder doing their thing. And I feel like it kind of shows MLB's lack of tact and feel for promoting its players to his younger audiences, especially on social media. The lack of presence of baseball on social media is very problematic, and it's a bad way to grow a sport, especially when you have the polarizing topics around the analytics in baseball, and the advanced numbers as well. Baseball is in a real state of flux right now. And I feel like it's just a lot of moving parts and moving pieces. I could sit here and talk about that topic all day, just because the historical repercussions and historical precedents combined with the modern developments and new things as well. It's just such a wide ranging subject. It's just a lot. That's just it's a lot.
So Patrick, I want to ask you, you mentioned Francisco Lindor's show of solidarity with the kneeling at the start of the 2020 season. And when you said that, it got me thinking about solidarity. And then I thought back to Torrey Hunter's comments from 2010 when he said of the
Vladimir Guerrero thing. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not us.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, I mean, based on conversations you've had, are there like cultural rifts in clubhouses between the Afro-Latino players and the African-American players? Is that something that is, Torrey Hunter said the quiet part out loud maybe, but are other players, is this a thing?
It is, but it isn't. I will say that bleeds over in the interaction between Black people from different parts of the diaspora as well. And I will say that perspective that a lot of Black people have is indoctrination. It's white. It's a colonial mindset, just to put it nicely. It's ahistorical. It's not true. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know if he played with Fernando Rodney, but Fernando Rodney would disagree with him. George Bell, who played on the Kansas City Royals in the 70s and 80s, wouldn't agree with them. And I will use their demographics examples, as I said before. George Bell, Fernando Rodney, Brian Bello. You guys might wonder why a player from the Dominican might have a last name like Rodney, or why somebody named George Bell and born and raised in the Dominican Republic. They're part of a group of Americans African Americans who were deported from the United States to Latin America called Samoan Americans, and they're actually concentrated in the Samana region of the Dominican Republic now. But back then it was all Haiti, because Haiti owned full authority of the island of Hispaniola back then. They have their own Creole, which is a mixture of English and Spanish, called Samana English. And they still name themselves with American names. They use American surnames and first names as George Bell, Fernando Rodney, as that. So they claim their heritage. They know who they are. I'll give you another example. You guys probably remember David Green, top prospect with the Cardinals, was compared to Roberto Clemente and Willie Mays as a teenager. First player of Nicaraguan descent to play as a position player. He's actually of Jamaican descent. His grandfather immigrated to Nicaragua from Jamaica in the late 1800s. The area of Nicaragua that they moved to on the Mosquito Coast, it was actually a 60,000 square kilometers of land that is now modern day Nicaragua was a British colony from the late 1600s to the late 1800s. It soon became an enclave for escaped slaves and freed slaves of African descent from all over the Caribbean and Latin America, because at this time, slavery was still rampant in Latin America. So Eduardo Green, David Green's father, is seen as one of the 5 best players who have never played in the Negro Leagues or Major League Baseball. And there was numerous times where he tried to play in Cuba, he tried to play in the United States, but he didn't. And he was so sought after that during the early 50s, the Dodgers actually negotiated and actually gave him a hefty sum of money when he was in his 30s because he was that good. He's basically Nicaraguan Monte Irvin. He played center field and shortstop, and he was a beast. So upon his arrival to the United States for spring training with the Dodgers, he was so disgusted with the racism that he literally left and went back to Nicaragua within a week. To further emphasize my point, Torii Hunter's comments about "Dare Not Us" don't make any sense based on the actions and words of Roberto Clemente, Orlando Cepeda, Luis Ciante II, Luis Ciante III, and others. Someone like Torii Hunter probably couldn't tell me the difference or tell me what race, ethnicity, and nationality is in their own words. Someone like Torii Hunter probably doesn't understand that African American culture itself is inherently an amalgamation of African and Caribbean cultures. It's based on how those things work. As someone who went to Morehouse College, it's kind of offensive, and it kind of disappoints me when Black people from any country have that sentiment about any other Black people from the other country, because it just shows how ignorant they are and the lack of knowledge they have of themselves and where they come from, what their culture is, and what it means to be an individual African descent, what it means to be Black. A lot of Black people in America have this misconstrued conception that to be Black is to be African American, and that's not the case. There's tons of Black baseball players who, I wouldn't say that, and just to answer your question too, Tip, it's an individual thing. Like, I can say comfortably that I wouldn't think there's a rift in the Cleveland Guardians clubhouse with Francisco Lindor there, and the other Black players on the team. And Minnie Mioso was another very outspoken Black player as well. And it's also a regional thing as well. Players from the Dominican Republic are going to be less what's the word I'm looking for? You're not going to see as many players in the Dominican Republic say that because of the Trujillo regime and the damage that they did on a multi-generational level with the anti-Blackness there. So you have that as well. And similar to how a lot of Black people in America are miseducated on what it means to be Black and have internalized a lot of xenophobia and things like that as well, trying to assimilate into American society. Yeah, I think that's, but I will say it's probably an individual thing. With someone like Roberto Clemente, he wouldn't tolerate Torii Hunter doing something like that. if he was there on the same team, you'd probably attack him for it in private or in public. You never know. As someone who has Black friends from Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Jamaica, Cuba, etc., and who has connected with a lot of Black people from those countries because of my writing, they'd probably spit on the ground if someone told them that to their face. You're not us. I mean, it's ahistorical. It's extremely ahistorical and it's inaccurate and it doesn't make any sense. And I actually have thought about writing an article about Torrey Hunter, but I'm actually writing one right now about the conundrum of race and ethnicity and nationality in Black baseball, because that narrative is too widespread when it shouldn't be, not just in baseball, but just in Black history in general.
Thank you, Patrick. Does anybody else have a question that they haven't had a chance to ask? We're starting to run low on time here, and I want to make sure we give Patrick time to offer any final comment or conclusion. Any last questions?
I looked at your blog. It's great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
My only thought is, a question I don't expect you to have to answer this, but for all of us to think about, what can SABR do to make ourselves more diverse and attract more people of color into SABR?
I think SABR is probably one of the leading entities in baseball that kind of focuses not just on African American players, but Black baseball players from the African diaspora, and also doing the research that shows that they acknowledge themselves as Black, whether it be in the United States or out of it, and also especially the honesty with detailing people's personal lives and stuff. Just like reading a article about Oil Can Boyd, and the first thing SABR article about the SABR bio article about Oil Can Boyd, and the very first paragraph, the lead was about his parents hosting some civil rights organizers who were murdered and lynched later that night. I mean, you just don't see many people shine the light on the intersection of the civil rights movement, Black history, colonialism, just those things, Black history with the game itself, because many people don't even realize that baseball was one of the primary factors that helped dismantle de jure and de facto racism in the United States. And when you tell people that, they look at you funny, even though it's right in their face. Jackie Robinson used baseball for that matter. Martin Luther King used baseball for that matter. Henry Aaron used baseball for that matter. Willie Mays was a low-key guy, but he also deferred a lot to Jackie Robinson and them. And you also have, the outspoken athletes and the players like Roberto Clemente and stuff as well. I mean, just baseball and history is inextricably linked. So I wrote, actually, in my very first opportunity to write something for SABR, I said that the 150 years of history that the African diaspora has with baseball encapsulates that the different nationalities and ethnicity of African diaspora are inextricably linked, because that's correct. Baseball really encapsulates that really well. Whether you look at the Negro Leagues, you got players from Jamaica, the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Panama, Nicaragua, etc., playing in Negro Leagues, because in Cuba as well. Cuba was a very big one. So yeah.
Here's a footnote, and I wouldn't mention it except it's coincidental and interesting to me. There is a new book out that I've just picked up. I say new, 2022. And it makes your point, Patrick, about both the solidarity and the diversity of the diaspora. It's by a historian I love by the name of David Hackett Fisher. It's called African Founders. And it goes through all the destinations and the origin places in Africa, on the continent of Africa, and the various identities that get brought and merged, and linguistically and culturally,
Yes.
and the contributions that these groups make. And he's got about 8 or 9 different cultural regions just within British America in the 16 and 1700s. And so I just want to say thank you, really, because having looked at this, and now you have just widened that that vision to include the Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latin area, and using baseball as an example, which I love. So little bibliography for you all. And,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
and Patrick, thank you for the for enlarging that enlarged horizon for me, just in the way you've done your presentation and answered the question. So keep
Thank
it
you.
going.
Patrick, thank you. Any final comments or concluding words you want to give us before we let you go here?
I really enjoyed doing this. Thank you guys for having me. I love talking baseball, Black history, everything in between that correlates with the two. So I'm very flattered to be able to get that you guys would let me step on my soapbox and go on tangents and just talk about stuff that I love. I really enjoy being here. I really thank you guys for having me, and thank you guys for the opportunity. I really am happy, and I hope you guys all enjoyed it and learned something, and I hope I did well.
And where can we find you or follow you if we aren't already?
Okay. My Twitter is tangible, TANGIBLE. As in something real, tangible. Tangible_UNO, UNO, as in one. So I'm on Twitter there. I have my online portfolio. I can email it to Tip, and he can kind of email to you guys if you guys don't have it already. That includes my portfolio and all my other bylines at MLB, baseball perspectives, etc. All of my bylines at MLB and baseball perspectives, etc. focus on Black players as well. I would say my proudest byline I've done so far was on Jocelyn Allen and Tristan McKenzie, because they're Jamaican players actually. Both are first generation Americans of Jamaican descent. One from Canada, one from Florida. And that was important for me, especially when looking at the history that Cleveland has with Black players and how they kept that going and have really promoted that, and how the Black players who have played for the team have really kind of taken that part of the identity and represented it really well. Especially guys like Francisco Lindor, Jose Ramirez, CC Sabathia, Michael Brownlee, etc. So I'm really just on Twitter, just there pretty much. So.
Okay. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time with us. Anytime you want to get back on your soapbox, let us know. We'd love to have you. And you have a very unique story to tell. This is a story that you don't find everywhere. It's not, you're right, you're zigging where others are zagging. So thank you for sharing your work with us, and please stay in touch. To everyone else, thank you for coming out on a summer evening. Appreciate you taking the time. I think the Mariners are probably on. Oh, they're not playing tonight. Well, you have to find something else to watch then. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you
all.
guys. You guys have a good one.